Hi there. In this video, I want to respond to a couple of people who've asked how I went about making these types of vector illustrations or images. For me, this was a three-part process. The first thing I did was I sort of decoded the brief that we were given. So we're given four paragraphs which were relating to the library in the city for a studio called Studio Delta. And from that, I sort of created my own set of goals for each image, which were just sort of like ideas in my head while I went about sketching them. So with those goals in mind, I sort of sketched out potential relationships between those goals on a 2D plane. These are all very, very rough. I mean, just that was enough for the third image. Because in my head I knew what I wanted to do with the goals. And once I had sketched it out, it was a process of modeling it in Rhino. So I've got these sort of 3D wacky models, and like this one here, and also this one here, which was sort of skewed for the axonometric view. And so from the top view, I would export that out, and then you'd end up with something like this, or the base for this, and then you refine the line weights, you create compound objects, and you set a background, which is a color which is appropriate. And all of that is a lot of tweaking to get the desired output. So within this image, this paragraph is represented in a couple of different ways. The poles down the bottom try and represent how the designer can acoustically design a space. So for example, in a library, you might want to have areas which are more quiet, or areas which are allow a bit more echoing or ambient noise to occur. So for example, in the middle of the library here, we have some group spaces which may be a little bit more lively, whereas at the perimeter of the library, you might want to have study spaces which are a bit more quiet. So I've sort of represented that with maybe some division in space with these poles. These white dashed lines conceptualize how the users of the space may have sourced their information. So for example, these two people here who are studying, they may have just sourced a couple of books from bookshelves, which are represented by blue, or local resources are represented by these blue circles. And the red circles are the study spaces. And when they sort of research, their knowledge then sort of goes upwards, and it sort of is shaped by their reading. These lines over here, they represent sort of the accessibility towards a library. The public library is all inclusive. So these lines sort of represent the diversity of where people are coming from. And over here, I have a sort of a group study space where people are discussing, and you can see the lines are actually coming from each person, and they're not coming from anywhere else. So they're learning from each other, and their knowledge, which is represented by these lines which go up into the air, that's sort of intertwining and entangling with each other and sort of being shaped quite free form. At the back of this, I've got this sort of hexagonal shape, which represents sort of like a cohesive field upon which these elements can be spatialized together. So here I am in Rhino, and this is what I had previously modeled when I did this project. I have all of these tubes down the bottom, these extrusions, capped extrusions, these circles, the lines, so the curves, and the curves which go up into the air. And then, you know, the idea is that we eventually get it looking something like that. So over here, I did the axonometric skew. So I'll do the Make 2D now, and I'll include the hidden lines. So now I've created the Make 2D. I'm going to clean it up a little bit before I export it to Illustrator. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the lines which I don't want to keep. So here I've got some doubling up, so I'm going to take those lines, find the layer, select the objects, isolate them, and I want to keep everything that's going north-south. I join them. Yeah, good. So I've just joined them to make it easier to select. This is a bit of a manual process. Now I've got that selection, I want to keep them visible. So I'm going to put them on a new layer in the visible. Then I can find that layer again and turn that layer off. So now I still have the hidden grid behind this area. I also have the north-south, which I can adjust as I wish. Go back to this, what do we have? Okay, it doesn't have it behind the tubes. So select them, so deselect the top ones, and I'm going to delete the bottom ones. So behind this, I still have this grid. And I want to delete those elements as well. Delete that, and now the tubes are quite clean as I had it before. And we have the north-south lines here with the grid. Excellent. There are actually a couple more things which I want to do before I export this. It's easier to do it in Rhino than in Illustrator. So the first thing I want to do is create these quadrants for that backing texture. So I want to have this look like a plane on the right hand side, bottom part look like a plane, and the left hand side look like a plane. If you have a look at the final image, I've got a slight gradient, so all of these parts up here down to this bottom right corner, that whole thing is one plane, and it sort of looks like it's sitting in this sort of three-dimensional cube. So I want to do that in Rhino. So for that, I'm just going to quickly select the these orange elements and put them on their own layers. Okay, so now I've put them all in their own quadrants. I'm just going to do a little bit of line weight manipulation so that they're more manageable in Illustrator. So the visible layers, change it from default, I don't know, let's say 0.123 mils. I'm then going to change the hidden lines to be, say, 0.49 mils. Next thing I want is, I know that these are supposed to be thick. If I look over here, those ones are thick, the ones up here are thick, this white one's thick. So I'll do that, and these, and this. Press F4, give me all of those objects, and I'll press F2, give me those layers exactly. Now I'm going to go to, I don't know, 0.25. So now I've made them a bit thicker. I actually might make them, I don't know, 0.3. And let's make the circles, so F4, F2, make them maybe 0.25, and so on and so forth. I'm going to make the hidden lines behind a little bit thinner actually. So now I'm ready to export to Illustrator. I have moved these Make 2D curves over the origin, or near the origin, so it will be easy to access from Illustrator. Now I want to figure out which scale I want to export this these model curves to. So this was modeled in sort of real scale, quite big. Now if I do the print command, and I do it in A3 portrait because that was the original submission format, you can see that if I go 1 to 500, it's too big, it doesn't fit on the A3 page. And if I go to, so I'm going to put it at 1 to 1000, knowing that I can always zoom in later because it's vector. So like that. So when I go File, Export Selected, choose the file name, choose the model scale as 1 to 1000, and do the export. I've then brought that into Illustrator. And with these curves, I've run a little script, which I'll provide in the link below, which basically takes all of these layers and nests them like you would have in Rhino. So for that, I go File, Scripts, Fix Layers. And you'll be able to install that with the instructions on GitHub. So it's going to do its thing, and now it nests its layers. So the first thing we want to do is sort of make the canvas the right size. If you have a look at this image, you can see that it's on this backing canvas. It's A3 vertical, A3 portrait. So I'm going to get the artboard tool, and I'm going to make it A3, and I'm going to make it portrait. I'm going to bring it across, and then to deselect, move copy artwork with artboard, so you can move the artboard independently. What you can see is that the artwork is going off this A3 page. So in this instance, I'm just going to make all of the artwork a little bit smaller. Holding Alt plus Shift and dragging the corner inwards, I'm going to make that artwork smaller, like this. If I take a look at the original Illustrator file that I did this about a year ago, it has, the way it works is it's got two fills, and this is to create the grain, right? So I've got two fills. I've got a golden fill, and I've got a purple fill. And the golden fill is has a grain effect, which is applied to it, and that grain effect is so this layer, so this fill layer is only at 4%, and it has a luminosity blend mode. So if I turned, let's just say for example, if I turn this up to 100, you can see that that grain is affecting things a lot more seriously, and that's why I brought it down. So let's create that from scratch. Let's create a new layer underneath, no, here. Create a rectangle on this layer. Invert the fill. Let's make it, I don't know, purple, dark purple. I'm going to duplicate this fill within this rectangle. I'm going to change this to, as I had it before, which may have been some gold. I'm going to put that on luminosity. So now I've created this secondary fill layer. I'm going to apply the effect. So I've got Effects, Texture, Grain, and this is what it comes up with. I'll just press OK on that. Now I'm going to change the blend mode to luminosity so we don't get any of the color, and I'm going to change the opacity down to 4. So if I zoom in now, you can see we're getting that same grit effect on the background. So I'm going to lock this layer now. I might rename it to background texture. Now we can start working on the rest of the image. I'll just turn this off for now. Let's say we wanted to take this layer here. We want that, basically we want all of the colors to be brighter, right? So I might just do a global color correction. So for me, I've got a shortcut, Control-Alt-Shift-R. Global adjust, bring up the brightness. Yep, and now press OK. And you see that when I turn on the background, starting to see some things. Now this was black, so I didn't really know what to do with it. I'm going to select all of them and change the color to something closer to the white. So now we're starting to see things on the background. So the next step is to create compound paths and then apply gradients to those compound paths so they all work as one thing. So for example, I know that these are quadrants. I'm going to select those elements there. I'm going to go Object, Compound Path, Make, and I'm going to do that with the other quadrants as well. So the bottom quadrant, I'll go Object, Compound Path, Make, and lastly the left one as well. Object, Compound Path, and Make. Now I've got 3 compound paths. I need to create a swatch which has the gradient. So to do that, I'm going to create a gradient like this. I'm going to add a middle point, so click down here. I'm going to make that white, and I'm going to make the first one more red, so somewhere in there. And the second one, I'm going to make that more cyan. HSB, and then go to cyan, something like in there. Now I have this, I want to create a new swatch. I'll call that like that, and now I can apply this to any of my compound objects. So I select that, select this, and now you can see actually that gradient has been applied. So I might do that for the other two as well. In this instance, I'm going to flip the gradient around. So I'll just select it like that, and you can see the red is in the center. And then the bottom, bottom compound path, I'll also create, I'll select a swatch, and then I'll go back to and put it at 90 degrees. Oops. So now what we have is this sort of table effect where you can see that compound path in the background is sort of like a table for this stuff to sort of sit upon, and these are acting like walls of this weird cube thing. So I'm now going to go through the rest of the image and sort of emulate what I created in the first place, which was here, and I'll show you how I did that. So some of the things that I've seen are, for example, these lines here, these diamonds. I'm going to select that layer, make them all white, and I'm going to make them a lot finer. So go to line weight, make that, maybe make that 0.07. This is where you're really just playing with things until you get it right. You can see here that this compound, these should all be at the bottom, so I'm going to bring them just above the background texture. I'm going to make these lines dashed. And they should go above other things. Select this layer, make it a compound object, and then apply the swatch. Yep, that'll do. I might rotate that gradient around a little bit. Now I'm just applying the swatch to all of these compound paths. Something like that. I'm going to put this below so it's not on top of those lines. All of these lines, I don't want them to be dashed, so I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to turn off the dash, and I'm going to actually create a compound path of them too. I'm going to make all of these lines much, much thinner. So now I have taken all of these vertical lines and I've made them much, much thinner, and I've put them on the same layer. You can then make them into a single compound object, apply the swatch, and make that 90 degrees so it's vertical. And I might make that a little bit thicker. Put it 0.04. I'm going to control hide the guides so I can see what I'm doing. So I go to the original, That's what it was, blue at the top. Now I'm going to do the inverse with the outlines of these tubes, so the red's at the top. So I've selected all of the edges of the tubes. I'm going to create them into a compound path as well. Control 8. Now I'm going to apply the swatch. Switch the swatch around to -90 degrees. So it's like this, and change the thickness to maybe 0.1. Nope. Let's say 0.18 mils. Okay. Alright, now you can see that we're gradually getting towards the original. I think I'll leave the video here actually. This took us through quite a few different steps to get to the final output, and I showed you what I normally do to take it from a concept into, well, this type of abstract final drawing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it. Consider subscribing and sharing it with your friends if you think they'll find it useful. Cheers.